The sea doesn't warn when it decides to collect its due. It doesn't send a letter. It doesn't ring the doorbell. It simply rises. And when it rises, it takes everything. Houses, cars, stories, futures. Laura Mendez was cutting fabric in her studio when she heard the sound. It wasn't the sound of a wave. It was the sound of an ending, as if the ocean had opened its mouth and decided to swallow the entire city. She had 12 seconds to decide whether to run or die. She chose to run, but she had to leave everything behind, including the one thing that truly mattered. Her mother's necklace, the one she had sworn never to take off. 3 months later, a diver knocked on the door of the shelter where she was living. He was holding a rusty key tied to a blue ribbon, and he said only, "I think this belongs to you." Laura had no idea what that key opened, but when she found out, everything changed. Before continuing this story, I need to ask you something. If you're feeling anything right now, curiosity, emotion, even a tightness in your chest, leave a like on this video. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because stories like this, the ones that truly move us, we bring them here every week. And comment below, I would have run too. I want to know if you put yourself in Laura's place. Now come with me. Go back to that day. The day everything disappeared. The afternoon of March 28, 2024, was too bright, an impossible blue. One of those days when tourists take pictures and post them with the caption, "Paradise exists." Laura Mendez was in her studio, her quick fingers cutting a piece of raw linen that would soon become a handmade embroidered bag. Around her, shelves filled with perfectly folded fabrics, colored threads organized by shade, ceramic pieces she painted herself on Sunday afternoons. The smell of acrylic paint mixed with stale coffee and lavender incense hung in the small air of the place. She was 32, with brown hair that refused to stay in the messy bun she redid 3 times an hour, and that distracted air of someone who lives with half her head in the real world, and the other half inside a creative idea still taking shape. The studio was on Ocean Drive, number 247, exactly 3 blocks from Seabrook's old pier in California, a small town with fewer than 5,000 residents. Known for its antique markets held every Saturday in the town square, and for the stubborn fishermen who still used hand nets instead of industrial ones, Seabrook was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where you didn't lock your door, where the market owner wrote down your purchases in a notebook, and you paid at the end of the month. It was a town that seemed to have stopped in 1985 and decided that was fine. Laura had lived there since she was born. She knew every corner, every crack in the asphalt of Main Street, every stray dog that had a name and an invisible owner, every local face, every family story, every poorly kept secret. Her mother, Elena Mendez, had owned the only bookstore in town, Pages of the Sea, located 2 streets up from the studio, selling everything from paperback romances to rare first editions that Elena found in obscure online auctions. Elena died 7 years earlier of pancreatic cancer. Fast, brutal, no time for proper goodbyes or final words that made sense. One day she was complaining of back pain. 3 months later, she was being buried in the small cemetery behind the Methodist church. Laura inherited only 3 tangible things from the woman who raised her alone after her father disappeared when she was 2. The bookstore, which she had to sell 6 months later because she couldn't set foot inside without breaking down in tears every time a customer walked in. A hospital debt totaling $83,000, which she was still paying off in installments that consumed half her income. And a necklace. An old silver locket, worn down by time and constant touch, with a tiny photo of a young Elena, no more than 20, holding baby Laura in her arms, both smiling at a camera that no longer existed. She never took that necklace off. Not to sleep, not to shower, not even on unbearably hot days, when the silver burned against her skin and left a red mark. That afternoon of March 28th, the necklace was there, hanging around her neck, lightly swinging and tapping her chest every time she leaned over the work table to cut fabric more precisely. Laura was too focused to notice that the day was too quiet, that the birds had stopped singing 20 minutes earlier, that the neighbor's dog, the hysterical mutt that barked at everything, had been whining low and continuous since noon. Nature knows. It always knows. But humans forgot how to listen. It was when the church bell began to ring that Laura finally stopped. The scissors froze in midair, her eyes squinting toward the window facing the street. The bell never rang outside Sunday. Never. It was an unwritten rule, a tradition that Father Michael followed religiously, if you'll forgive the pun. But there it was, ringing desperately, fast, erratic, as if someone were yanking the rope in panic. Then came the loudspeakers. The town had 4 of them, installed after the 2019 fire that almost consumed the entire east side. The voice that came out was hoarse, distorted, nearly unintelligible. But the words cut through the air with razor clarity. Tsunami warning, immediate evacuation, move to high ground. Repeat, tsunami. Confirmed, you have minutes. Laura felt her stomach drop and freeze at the same time. Tsunami. In Seabrook, the town had been there for over 150 years and had never been hit by a tsunami. Not even when that 7.2 magnitude earthquake shook the Oregon coast in 2013 and sent 3-meter waves up and down the west coast. Seabrook had always been safe. It was almost a local pride. The town, the sea respects, the elders said. She dropped the scissors and ran to the window. Outside, the world had turned to instant chaos. People were running in every direction, some carrying bags, others carrying children, some carrying nothing at all, just running because everyone was running. Cars sped off aimlessly, honking, colliding in slow motion. A woman pushed a stroller while screaming a name Laura couldn't make out. The bakery owner, Mr. Chen, a 70-year-old Chinese man who made the best croissants north of San Francisco, was standing in the middle of the street staring at the horizon as if hypnotized. And then Laura saw it. The sea. It looked different. It wasn't lapping at the rocks the way it always did, with that steady, predictable rhythm she'd heard since childhood. It was receding. Too fast. As if someone had pulled a giant plug from the ocean floor and the water was being sucked into some invisible hole. Wet sand appeared where it never did. Rocks covered in algae lay exposed. Fish flopped desperately on the sand, suffocating. A small boat that had been moored near the pier toppled onto its side, stuck in the mud. Laura had read about this. One of those sleepless nights when she fell into Wikipedia rabbit holes. She knew exactly what it meant. The sea was preparing to return. And when it did, it would come back with multiplied force, with stored rage, with everything it had pulled away. The physics were simple and brutal. The farther the sea retreats, the bigger the wave that returns. She ran to the studio door, locked it with trembling hands, as if locking it would make any difference, as if a $20 lock could hold back tons of water. She turned to grab the bag hanging from the chair, stopped, looked down, brought her hand to her chest. The necklace, it was there. But what if it fell during the run? What if she tripped and the chain broke? What if, in the chaos, someone bumped into her and tore it off? Without thinking, running purely on the autopilot of fear, Laura took off the necklace. For the first time in 7 years, she took it off. She opened the drawer of the counter where the old cash register sat, more for decoration than function. Inside was a small metal box, one of those English cookie tins that had become the universal container for knickknacks. She kept beads there, buttons, pins. She placed the necklace inside, closed the box, closed the drawer, looked at it as if saying goodbye to someone, thought with the irrational clarity of panic, *, I'll come back. In a few hours this will all be over. Everything will be fine. It will *. It was the worst decision of her life. But she didn't know that yet. Laura ran out of the studio and reality hit her like a slap. The noise was deafening. Sirens, screams, engines revving, the church bell still ringing madly. She ran down Ocean Drive, her sneakers pounding the hot asphalt, her heart racing faster than her legs could move. The sun still shone. The sky still blue. As if nothing were wrong. As if the world weren't about to end for those 5,000 people. Around her, pure chaos. People shouting names. Children crying. Lost. A fat, sweaty man carrying a flat-screen TV in his arms, as if that would save anything, as if entertainment mattered when you're about to drown. The earthquake had happened in Japan, magnitude 8.9, one of the largest ever recorded. The wave it generated was crossing the Pacific at over 800 kilometers per hour. Scientists had predicted it would reach the US West Coast, but believed its force would lessen significantly. They thought it might come at 1 meter, 2 at most. They were wrong. Very wrong. Laura reached Hillside Road, the street climbing toward the high part of town. A steep 45-degree incline that burned anyone's thighs. There was a school up there, Seabrook High School, and next to it a gymnasium used for basketball games and graduations. That's where everyone was running. It was the official evacuation point. Laura looked back as she climbed, just for a second, just to see if it was as bad as it seemed, and she saw the wall. It wasn't a wave. Wave was too small a word. It was a wall of water. 30 feet, 40, maybe 50. Black, filled with debris, uprooted trees, pieces of houses, cars spinning inside it. It moved slowly, but with that unstoppable freight train slowness, like a liquid mountain devouring everything in its path. She climbed faster. Her lungs burned as if inhaling fire. Her legs weakened, sweat ran down into her eyes, salty and blinding. People passed her, faster, more desperate. A child fell in front of her. Laura stopped, grabbed the girl by the arm, pulled her up, pushed her forward, said nothing. There was no time for words. The girl vanished into the stream of bodies moving uphill. And then came the roar, the impact, the sound of the end of the world. The water hit the first row of houses on Ocean Drive. Glass exploded in cascades. Wood splintered like paper. Whole walls disappeared. Cars were dragged like plastic toys in a bathtub. Light poles fell. Power lines whipped the air, sparking blue. The sound was unbearable, a roar mixed with explosions, muffled screams, twisting metal, cracking concrete. It was the sound of an entire city being chewed apart. Laura reached a gym. The door was open, held by 2 police officers shouting for people to get inside quickly. She entered, tripped, fell to her knees on the waxed wooden floor that smelled of old teenage sweat. Stayed there, on all fours, gasping, coughing, crying without realizing she was crying. Someone grabbed her arm, dragged her aside, made space for others coming in. She leaned against the cold wall. looked back once more through the still open doors and saw it. The city of Seabrook, her city, the place where she was born and raised and thought she'd die old, was being devoured. Literally, whole houses vanished beneath the filthy, furious water. Centuries-old trees were torn out like toothpicks, and somewhere in there, beneath that liquid chaos, was the studio. And inside it, inside a drawer, inside a metal box, was her mother's necklace. The only thing still connecting Laura to the woman who raised her. The police closed the gym doors. The sound outside became muffled, but never truly went away. It never would. 3 hours later, Laura was sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall of the gym, which now sheltered 463 people. According to the official count announced by a Red Cross volunteer through a megaphone, around her orange and silver emergency blankets that looked like aluminum foil, children trembling even in the heat, elderly people sitting in silence, staring into nothing, processing that they might have lost everything they had built in 70, 80 years of life. Laura's arms were wrapped around her legs, chin resting on her knees, eyes dry. She had cried so much in the first 2 hours that nothing more would come out. She was empty, hollow. A volunteer approached. Young, maybe 22, blonde hair and a ponytail, overly optimistic expression of someone who hadn't yet grasped the gravity. "Are you okay?" she asked in that too sweet voice. "Do you want water?" Laura didn't answer. "Couldn't," the woman insisted. Knelt in front of her, touched her shoulder. "There's food in the corner," she said, pointing to a table piled with ham sandwiches and plastic bags and bottles of water. "You need to eat something." "I don't want food," Laura finally answered, her voice hoarse, cold, unrecognizable. "I want to go back." The volunteer made that face, that mixture of pity and professional concern. "Sweetheart, no one can go back now," she said. "The city is off limits. There's a risk of new waves, of collapses, of gas fires. It's dangerous." "I know, I tease dangerous," Laura screamed. People nearby looked, conversations stopped, heads turned. She realized she had shouted, but didn't care. "I left something there," she continued, quieter now, but no less intense. "I need to go back. I have to." "What did you leave?" the volunteer asked. With that infinite patience Laura wanted to punch. "Money, documents. We can try to recover them later when it's cleared." "What did you leave?" Laura looked at her, looked into the eyes of this girl who had probably never lost anything that mattered in her life, and answered with 2 words that carried 7 years of grief. "Everything. I left everything." 3 months passed. 3 months that felt like 3 years. Laura still lived in the gym. They had built cardboard and tarp dividers to create improvised rooms, small 2 by 3 meter cubicles where families tried to rebuild some semblance of privacy and normality. She shared her cubicle with a 60-year-old woman named Margaret who had lost her husband in the tsunami. He had gone back for the dog. He never returned. Neither did the dog. Margaret didn't talk much. Spent her days knitting blankets no one needed because it was too hot. The studio had completely disappeared. Laura went there as soon as access was allowed. 2 weeks after the tsunami, nothing was left. Literally nothing. Just the cracked concrete foundation, covered in mud and debris. Everything she had built over the past 5 years was gone. The shelves, the fabrics, the painted ceramics, the tools, the furniture, everything. And the necklace. The necklace too. She dug through the mud with her bare hands for 3 hours, crying, sweating, ignoring the volunteers who tried to pull her away, found nothing. The drawer, the box, the necklace, gone. Ocean Drive no longer existed. Seabrook was a name on a map, but no longer a town. It was a cemetery of concrete and dry mud. Half the residents had left, moved in with relatives in other towns, other states. Those who stayed were trapped in an endless bureaucratic limbo of unpaid insurance claims, federal aid that never arrived, and reconstruction promises stuck on paper. Laura had given up. On everything. On rebuilding. On trying. On living, basically. She went to community meals because Margaret dragged her, showered because the smell became too strong, but did nothing else. Didn't draw, didn't plan, didn't dream. She was merely existing, waiting for something to happen or to stop happening. She wasn't sure which. It was on a hot, humid June morning, the kind of sticky heat that clings to the skin and doesn't leave, when someone knocked on her cardboard door. Laura was lying on the thin mattress the Red Cross had donated, staring at the tarp ceiling, counting damp stains. Margaret had gone to get coffee. She didn't move when the knock came. "Go away," she murmured. "Whoever you are, go away." The knock came again, more insistent. Laura sighed, stood up, opened the plastic curtain that served as a door, and froze. A man was standing there, tall, over 6 feet, dark-skinned, sunburned, black hair, wet droplets of water dripping onto the wooden floor. Wetsuit unzipped to the waist, revealing a white t-shirt underneath. He was holding something in his hand, something small. She couldn't see clearly at first because the sun came through the window behind him, creating a silhouette. But then he moved, and she saw it. A rusty key tied to a faded blue ribbon. "Are you Laura Mendez?" he asked. It wasn't really a question, more of a confirmation. She nodded, confused, still half lost between sleep and waking. He extended the key. His fingers were calloused, nails caked with mud. I think this is yours, he said. His voice was deep, slightly hoarse, like someone who smoked or shouted a lot, or both. Laura took the key. The metal was cold and rough. The rust stained her fingers orange. She looked at the object, at him, back at the object, then at him again. I don't understand, she said slowly. What is this? Where did you get it? Who are you? The diver smiled. It was a tired smile, small, more sad than happy. My name is Daniel Ruiz, he said. I'm a rescue diver. I've been working with the recovery team since April. We've been diving around what used to be Ocean Drive, looking for bodies, documents, valuables. I found this yesterday. It was caught on some debris near what's left of the old pier. Inside what seemed to be a larger structure, maybe a box. There was a metal tag nearby with your name engraved on it. Asterisk Laura Mendez. Asterisk I tried to locate you. They told me you were here. Laura looked at the key again. It didn't make sense. She had never seen that key before. The blue ribbon meant nothing to her. I don't know what this is, she said, handing the key back. You must be mistaken. It's not mine. Daniel didn't take the key. Left her hand suspended in the air with the object. I thought you'd say that, he said, but there's more. The key was inside something I couldn't open down there alone. It's big, heavy, looks like a capsule or safe. It's buried in the mud about 20 feet deep. I was going to ignore it, but it had markings, childlike drawings, and a date. 2002? Laura felt something strange in her stomach, a tingling, a memory trying to emerge from some dark place in the brain. 2002? She was 10 in 2002. Still living with her mother. The bookstore was starting to do well, and they had done something she had completely forgotten. Something buried as deep in memory as that capsule in the mud. Daniel continued. If you want to see what it is, you'll have to come with me. I'm going back there tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock, low tide. That's the best time. I can take you there. You don't have to dive. You just need to be there when I open it, because if it's what I think it is, he paused, you'll want to see this alone first. Laura gripped the key tighter, the rust marking her palm now. And what do you think it is? She asked, almost afraid of the answer. Daniel looked at her with those dark eyes that seemed to have seen too much underwater, too much death, too many endings. He answered with two simple words. Your story. Laura didn't sleep that night. She lay on the thin mattress staring at the rusty key she had placed on a cardboard box beside her makeshift bed. The blue ribbon was faded, almost white in places, but still showed that it had once been a vibrant blue. Margaret snored on the other side of the canvas divider, a deep, steady snore that usually annoyed Laura, but that night was only background noise to the thoughts spinning endlessly in her head. 2002, 10 years old. She and her mother, something buried. Why couldn't she remember properly? The memory was there. She felt it, like a word on the tip of her tongue, but covered by 22 years of other memories, other pains, other lives. She got up at 4 in the morning when the sky was still dark, and the entire gym smelled of old sweat and cheap disinfectant. She showered in the communal stalls in the women's locker room, warm water that never really got hot and never truly cold. She put on the only clean jeans she had, a gray t-shirt that was starting to form holes at the seams. Sneakers she had bought at a thrift store 2 weeks earlier because the ones she had worn on the day of the tsunami had been so destroyed by mud and salt water they had to be thrown away. She took the key, put it in her pocket, left the gym without leaving a note for Margaret because she didn't know what to say. How do you explain that? You're going to look for something you don't remember losing? Daniel was waiting outside, leaning against an old red Ford pickup. Paint faded, rust spots visible, a bumper sticker that read dive deep or go home. He was drinking coffee from a dented thermal mug, wearing the same wetsuit as the day before, but now completely dry. When he saw Laura, he waved and opened the passenger door. Inside, the car smelled of salt, wet rubber, and old cigarettes. The seat was torn in 3 different places, patched with silver duct tape. She got in, he got in, started the engine, which coughed twice before catching. They drove in silence. The city was empty at that hour. Only a few volunteers in orange vests walking around, a few police officers on patrol, a few sleepless residents like Laura who had given up trying to rest. Daniel drove slowly down Hillside Road toward what used to be downtown Seabrook. The destruction was still shocking even after 3 months. Houses sliced in half like cakes, exposing bedrooms, living rooms, interrupted lives. Cars stacked on top of each other at impossible angles. Boats, blocks away from the sea, resting in the middle of streets, as if they had simply decided to stop there. Trees uprooted, 3-meter roots exposed. And mud, dry mud on everything, gray thick, cracked by the sun, covering asphalt, sidewalks, gardens that would never be gardens again. You okay? Daniel asked, breaking the silence as they passed what had been Mr. Chun's bakery. The structure was still standing, but the windows were gaping holes, and the door had completely vanished. Laura didn't answer immediately. She looked at her hands in her lap. I don't know, she finally said. Honestly, I don't know if I've been okay for a long time. Daniel nodded, as if he understood exactly what she meant. He didn't offer empty words of comfort, didn't say it would all be fine, or that time heals or any of those prepackaged phrases people throw around in moments like that. He just kept driving. They stopped where Ocean Drive began, or where it used to. Now it was just a muddy void leading to the water. The old pier, built in 1952 and having survived storms, hurricanes, decades of rough seas, had been reduced to broken pillars jutting from the water at odd angles like the fingers of a drowned giant. Daniel turned off the engine, took a backpack from the back seat, looked at Laura. Last chance to turn back. He said, "If you don't want to see this, I understand. I can open it myself, document it, give you whatever's inside later." Laura looked at the water. The sun was starting to rise, painting the sky orange and pink colors too beautiful for such a destroyed place. "No," she said. "I need to be there. I need to see it with my own eyes." Daniel smiled, that tired smile again. "Then let's go." They walked across the dry mud that cracked under their feet. Laura stepped where Daniel stepped, following his footprints, avoiding the parts that looked softer, more dangerous. The smell was horrible. Rotten fish, sewage, something chemical she couldn't identify. Seagulls circled above, screeching that piercing cry that always sounded like a warning. It took them 15 minutes to reach the spot Daniel wanted, a place that looked like nothing special, just more mud and debris, a piece of wall with blue tiles still clinging to it, half a child's bicycle, a bent street sign. Daniel dropped the backpack, pulled out a small oxygen tank, regulator, mask, fins, waterproof flashlight, began to gear up with the automatic movements of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. "You dive since when?" Laura asked, more to break the strange silence than out of real curiosity. "Since I was 16, he said, adjusting the mask straps. "My father was a commercial diver, worked on oil rigs, taught me. I hated it at first, was afraid of the depth, the pressure, the darkness down there. But he said the ocean keeps everything, all the stories, all the secrets, that if you know how to look right, you'll find things people don't even know they've lost." He paused, looked at the sea. He died diving. Explosion on a platform in the Gulf of Mexico, 2015. They never found the body. "I guess that's why I do this. I look for lost things because I couldn't find him." Laura didn't know what to say. Sorry sounded inadequate. Thank you for sharing sounded too formal. So she simply said, "He'd be proud." And Daniel looked at her with an expression that was half surprise, half gratitude, and answered, "I hope so." He finished gearing up, explained to Laura that he was going down, that it would take about 10 minutes, that she should stay exactly where she was because the tide was starting to rise and the ground became unstable quickly. He handed her a cheap walkie-talkie, the toy kind. "If you call me, I'll hear," he said. "If anything seems wrong, shout and I'll come up." "Understood." Laura took the walkie-talkie. "Understood." Daniel walked to the water's edge, put the regulator in his mouth, turned on the flashlight, and dove in. The water swallowed him in 2 seconds. Laura was alone. The silence that followed was heavy. She looked around. At the ruins, at the sky growing lighter, at the still water where Daniel had disappeared. Gripped the walkie-talkie so tightly her fingers turned white. Started counting. 1, 2, 3. When she reached 600 in exact minutes, she began to get nervous. What if he'd gotten tangled in something? What if the oxygen ran out? What if a structure had collapsed on top of him? She brought the walkie-talkie to her mouth. "Daniel," she said, her voice louder than she intended. "You okay?" Static. Nothing. "Daniel." Her heart began to race. Shit. Shit, shit, shit. She looked at the water as if looking could make him appear. She was about to call again when the surface broke and his head emerged. He spat out the regulator, took a deep breath, smiled. "Found it," he shouted. "And it's bigger than I thought." It took another 20 minutes for Daniel to bring up the capsule. He had 2 tie ropes. Use an improvised pulley system he'd set up on the nearest pier pillar. Pull gradually. Laura helped as best she could, pulling when he told her to pull, holding when he told her to hold. When they finally dragged the thing out of the water and onto drier mud, both were exhausted, sweaty, covered in sludge. The capsule was a metal cylinder, maybe a meter long, 30 centimeters in diameter, completely rusted, covered in barnacles and dead algae, but it was visible. Drawn in paint that had once been red, but was now almost faded. There was a sun, a house, a stick figure with long hair, and words. Written in childish, uneven handwriting. Laura and Mom, 2002. Open in the future. Laura felt her legs give way, sat in the mud, didn't care about the dirt, looked at the cylinder as if it were a bomb about to explode. "I remember," she whispered. "I remember now." Daniel sat beside her, said nothing, just waited. Laura closed her eyes. The memory came back in flashes, fragments. She was 10. It was summer. Her mother had just gotten the diagnosis. No, wait, not diagnosis yet, just suspicion. Her mother had gone to the doctor because she was too tired, because she had lumps, because she was scared. And that day, that July day in 2002, Alina decided to do something with her daughter. Something special, something lasting. "Let's make a time capsule," she had said. "Let's put in things that matter now. And one day, when you're grown up, we'll open it together and remember." Laura had loved the idea. They spent the whole afternoon choosing what to put inside. Laura drew a lot. The house they lived in, the sea. The 2 of them holding hands, wrote notes about her favorite things. Her favorite movie was Monsters, Inc. Her favorite color was purple. Her dream was to be an artist. Elena put things in 2 photos, a letter, a few small objects. They sealed it all inside that metal cylinder Elena had bought at a hardware store, painted it together, walked to the pier, and buried it near the pillars, in a place Elena said would always be there, always safe. But then Elena got really sick. The cancer came fast. And in the years that followed between chemotherapy and hope and despair, and finally death, Laura simply forgot, completely forgot about the capsule. The human mind is good at that. It erases what hurts too much. Erases even what was good if it's mixed with pain. She opened her eyes, looked at Daniel, who was watching her with that infinite patience. "My mother?" Laura said, voice breaking. "We did this together, before she died." "I had completely forgotten." Daniel nodded. "You want to open it?" he asked. "Or do you want time?" Laura looked at the key in her pocket, pulled it out. The lock on the capsule was so rusted it looked impossible to open. But Daniel had tools. Lubricant oil, patience. They worked together for 15 minutes. Laura holding, Daniel maneuvering. Until something clicked, the lock gave way. The lid began to turn, screeching, resisting, but turning. Laura held her breath, finished opening it, looked inside, and the world stopped. The interior was surprisingly dry. The cylinder had been well sealed. Inside was a thick plastic bag, the kind with a ziplock for freezers. And inside the bag, protected, preserved like in a museum, was everything. Laura's drawings. Faded but recognizable. She picked one up. It was her and her mother on the beach, both smiling. The sun had been painted bright yellow, and had eyes and a happy mouth. There were notes, written on lined notebook paper. "Dear future me," one said. "I hope you're happy. I hope you still like to draw. I hope Mom is still with you." Laura felt her throat close. There were photos. Young Elena, Elena holding baby Laura, Elena in the bookstore surrounded by books. There was a leather cord with a carved wooden bead. There were shells they had collected. There was a movie ticket from the film they'd watched together that summer. And at the bottom, wrapped in pale blue tissue paper, was an envelope. Thick, yellowed, sealed with red wax. On the envelope was written, in Elena's elegant handwriting, "For Laura. Open when you need to remember." Laura's hands trembled so much she almost dropped the envelope. Daniel noticed. "Want me to leave you alone?" he asked quietly. Laura shook her head. "No, please stay. I don't want to be alone for this." He stayed. She opened the envelope carefully so as not to tear it. Inside were 3 sheets of paper, handwritten Elena's handwriting. Laura began to read, and the world around her completely disappeared. "My dear Laura, if you're reading this, it means you found our capsule. I hope you're already an adult. I hope you've lived a lot. I hope you've loved and been loved. But if you're opening this now, maybe it's because something difficult happened. Maybe it's because you need to remember something you've forgotten. So I'll tell you a secret I've never told anyone. When I was 22, younger than you probably are now, I lost everything. There was a flood. Not as big as the ones you see on TV, but big enough. It took the house I lived in. Took all my things. Photos of my mother, who had died when I was 16. The diary I'd kept since I was 12. Clothes, books, everything. I was left with the clothes on my back, literally, and I thought I was going to die. Not really die. But inside, I thought I wouldn't be able to go on. How do you go on when everything that connected you to the past disappears? But then something happened. 3 weeks after the flood, I was living with a friend, sleeping on her couch, crying every night. And she gave me a notebook, blank, and said, write everything you remember. Write your mother. Write your childhood. Write what you lost. And I wrote. I filled that notebook in 2 weeks. And when I finished, I realized something. Things don't hold memories. We do. The photos were just paper. The diary was just ink. The real story was always here. She drew a heart next to that sentence. Inside me, and inside you too, Laura. If you've lost something, if the world has taken something precious from you, remember this. The sea can take houses, it can take cities, it can even take people, but it can never drown what truly matters. Your memories, your love, your ability to create beauty again, all of that is within you. Always has been, always will be. When I found out I was sick, I was afraid. Not of dying, everyone dies. I was afraid you'd forget. Forget me. Forget what I taught you. Forget that you're strong, stronger than you think. So I made this capsule with you. Texto copiado because I knew one day you'd need to remember, and I wouldn't be there to tell you in person. But I'm telling you now, through time, through paper, through the kind of love that doesn't end just because a heart stops beating. You are my work of art, Laura, the most beautiful one I ever helped create. And artists don't give up. Artists take the broken pieces and make something new. Something no one else could make. So take these pieces, take this pain, and create. Create something so beautiful it'll make the world stop and look. Not for me. For you, because you deserve it. Because you always have. I love you. Yesterday, today, tomorrow. Forever, Mom. Laura didn't realize she was crying until the tears fell onto the paper and slightly blurred the old ink. She read it again, and again, and again. Daniel said nothing. Just stayed there. Silent presence. Anchor. When she finally managed to speak, her voice came out hoarse, broken, but steady. She knew, Laura said. She knew I'd lose everything. Not exactly how, but she knew, and she left this for me. Daniel cleared his throat. Your mother seems like she was an incredible woman. Laura folded the letters carefully, put them back in the envelope, hugged it to her chest. She was incredible, and I'm going to honor her. I don't know how yet, but I will. They sat in the mud for another hour, watching the sun rise fully, watching the tide slowly come in, watching the dead city around them start to wake with the sounds of tractors and reconstruction trucks. Laura looked at the drawings again, at the shells, at the photos, at everything that had survived against all odds, and something started to form in her mind. An idea, small, fragile, but growing. Daniel, she said suddenly, you said you dive down there looking for things. You find other things, people's things. He nodded. All the time. Documents, jewelry, children's toys, photos, things that seem worthless but mean everything to someone. I catalog everything, take pictures. Try to identify the owners when I can. I've already returned about 50 items. Some people cry when they get them back, like I've given them back a piece of their soul. Laura looked at him. I want to help, not diving. I don't know how to do that, but there's something else I know how to do. I know how to create beauty. I know how to transform things. What if she hesitated, searching for the right words? What if we created something from that? From the things you find. A place where people could come and see, where they could remember that what matters wasn't completely lost. Daniel frowned, thinking like a memorial. Not exactly, Laura said, the idea becoming clearer as she spoke. Like a studio, where I take objects from the wreckage, clean them, restore them when possible, and turn them into art, into new pieces. Into something that tells the story of what was lost, but also of what survived. People could come to bring things they found, could commission pieces made from the ruins of their own homes. It would be like she paused, searching for the right word. Resurrection. It would be like resurrection through art. Daniel looked at her for a long moment, then smiled. That same tired, sad smile, but this time it had something else. Hope, maybe. Your mother was right about you, he said. You really are an artist. Laura smiled back. For the first time in 3 months, she truly smiled. Then let's do it, she said. Let's make something beautiful out of this end of the world. Daniel held out his hand. She shook it. Deal. They returned to the pickup carrying the capsule carefully. The sun was already high. The heat was starting to press down, but Laura felt something different. It wasn't happiness. Not yet. It was too soon for happiness. But it was purpose. It was direction. It was the feeling that maybe, just maybe, on the other side of all this destruction, something was waiting to be built. Something her mother would have been proud to see. As they drove back to the gym, Laura looked out the window at the ruined city. And for the first time, she didn't just see ruins. She saw material. She saw possibility. She saw a future that didn't exist yet, but that she could create, piece by piece, memory by memory. Until Seabrook was more than just a name on the map where a tragedy happened, until it became a place where art was born from the ashes or, from the mud, in this case. The first days were the hardest. Not for lack of will or ideas, but for the brutal reality that starting from zero when you literally have nothing is much more complicated than it looks in movies or in the inspirational stories people share on social media. Laura had the concept, she had the vision, she even had a name for the project, High Tide, a reference both to the tsunami and to the idea that after the tide rises, it eventually recedes and leaves things behind, things that can be found, rescued, transformed, but concept doesn't pay bills. Vision doesn't buy tools. A pretty name doesn't build a studio. She started small, tiny, actually. Margaret, the lady she shared a cubicle with in the gym, had a folding table she wasn't using. Laura borrowed it. She set it up outside the gym, under a tree that had survived the tsunami because it was rooted on high enough ground. She placed the time capsule objects on the table. Not all of them, some she kept, too personal, too sacred. But the children's drawings, the shells, a few notes. She put everything inside improvised frames made of cardboard and transparent plastic she got from Red Cross volunteers. She made a sign with a permanent marker on a piece of plywood. High Tide Project, turning debris into memory, turning memory into art. The first people who stopped were more curious than genuinely interested. Old Seabrook residents who had nothing left to do but walk among the ruins and try to understand how their lives had changed so completely in a matter of minutes. They looked at Laura's childhood drawings, at the shells worn down by time and water, at the handwritten sign. Some asked what it was, Laura explained, told them about the capsule, about her mother's letter, about the idea of taking lost objects and giving them new meaning. Some listened politely and left. Others stayed, sat on the dry grass beside the table, began to tell their own stories. That's how Laura met Thomas Berkeley. He was 68, a Vietnam veteran, had lived in Seabrook for the last 40 years. He lost his home in the tsunami, also lost his vinyl collection, over 2,000 records he had collected since he was a teenager. Jazz, blues, classic rock, soul. Each record had a story. Each cover had a memory. He was passing by Laura's table one July morning when he stopped and stared at one of the drawings, a child, drawing a sun with a smiling face. Thomas stood there for 5 whole minutes without saying a word. Laura didn't interrupt. She had quickly learned that sometimes people just need space to feel. Finally Thomas spoke, his voice hoarse. The voice of someone who had smoked all his life and recently quit because cigarettes had become too expensive after losing everything. My daughter used to draw suns like that, he said, when she was 5-6 years old. Always put faces on them, happy ones. Sometimes even with teeth. Laura smiled gently. Where is she now? Thomas shoved his hands into the pockets of his worn jeans. Atlanta, married, has kids of her own. We don't talk much, mostly my fault. Drank too much for too long. Drove everyone away, but she drew those suns. And I kept them. Had a whole box full. Drawings from 20-30 years ago. Kept them in the attic, all gone now. Laura picked up one of her own drawings, looked at it, looked at Thomas. Can I do something? Can I take this drawing of my son and turn it into something for you? Something you could give to your daughter? Like a bridge? Thomas frowned, confused. What do you mean, turn it into something? Laura thought quickly. She had an idea, but wasn't sure if it would work. I can scan this drawing, she said. Well, not scan because I don't have a scanner, but I can photograph it. There's a public library running in the temporary building nearby. They let people use the computers. I can edit the image, add your daughter's name, a message from you, print it on special paper, make it like a certificate, an apology, a new beginning. Thomas looked at her as if she had offered him gold. You'd do that? Why? Laura answered without hesitation. Because that's what art is for. To connect, to heal, to say things we can't say in ordinary words. Thomas came back the next day, and the next, and the next. Brought coffee for Laura, started helping set up and take down the table. Began telling other residents about the project. And when Laura finally managed to make that certificate, a thick piece of paper with a happy-faced sun in the center, and the words Asteristo, my daughter Rachel, I miss your drawings. I miss you. It's never too late to start over. With love, asterisk printed in a handwriting style font. Thomas cried. Cried right there in front of her without shame. Held the paper in both hands as if it were sacred. Mailed it to his daughter the same day. She replied 3 days later. It was the first time they had spoken in 7 years. The news spread. Not quickly, because Seabrook was small and most people were still dealing with traumas too big to think about art, or memory, or anything beyond basic survival. But slowly, steadily, people started to show up. They brought things, objects they had found, digging through the mud where their homes used to be. A woman named Patricia brought a silver fork. Just one fork. It had been part of the cutlery set she got for her wedding 43 years ago. It was the only piece that survived. She wanted Laura to do something with it. Anything. She just couldn't throw it away, but also couldn't use it because it hurt too much. Laura took the fork, spent 3 days cleaning, polishing, thinking. Finally bent the tines to create a sort of abstract sculpture. Welded, with Daniel's help apparently. He knew how to weld among his many other skills a small copper plate on the base, engraved with the words, asterisk, love doesn't rust, Patricia and John. 1981 to 2024. Asterisk, Patricia cried when she saw it, said it was perfect. Said she could finally look at that object and feel love instead of just loss. Meanwhile, Daniel kept diving. Almost every day, sometimes twice a day when the tide allowed. He had official permission now, a civil defense credential, minimal pay that barely covered gas and equipment maintenance. But he wasn't doing it for money. He was doing it because someone had to. Because under that dirty water there were still stories waiting to be found. He surfaced with strange, improbable objects. Once he brought up an old Remington typewriter from the 1940s, rusted but structurally intact. Another time, a porcelain doll missing one arm, but with its face untouched, glass eyes still blue and clear. He brought swollen books, family Bibles with genealogies written on the first page, photos glued into albums that disintegrated at the touch. Laura cataloged everything, photographed it, tried to identify owners when possible through markings, names, partial addresses. When she couldn't, she kept them anyway. Created a system, cardboard boxes organized by material: ceramic, metal, paper, fabric, wood. Each box numbered, each object tagged with where and when it was found. It was meticulous, exhausting, sometimes depressing work. Because for every beautiful object, there were 5 destroyed beyond repair. For every happy ending reunion, there were 10 where the owner had left, died, or simply didn't want to remember. But Laura kept going. And slowly, very slowly, the project began to take real shape. Seabrook's temporary city hall, operating out of a cluster of trailers parked in the school lot, offered Laura use of a warehouse. It wasn't much had been a maintenance storage facility before the tsunami, smelled of grease and old gasoline. The walls were corrugated metal that got unbearably hot by day and freezing at night. But it had a roof, a locking door, electricity. It was a palace compared to the table under the tree. Laura moved operations into the warehouse one August afternoon. Thomas, Daniel, and 5 other volunteers who had joined the project helped carry boxes, set up makeshift work tables from sawhorses and old doors, organized donated tools, Someone got a drill, someone got sandpaper, someone got paint. All used, donated, sometimes half broken, but they worked. Laura painted a huge banner on a white sheet. Asterisk High Tide Project Open Studio. Asterisk hung it in front of the warehouse. And officially, albeit precariously, the studio existed. If you haven't commented yet, comment now. Asterisk, this is what starting over really looks like. Asterisk, because that's exactly what Laura was doing, starting over, not pretending the tragedy never happened, not trying to go back to what was before, but building something new atop the ruins. And if that inspires you, if you're watching this story and feeling something, hit that like button, subscribe, because there's still so much more to come. Laura doesn't know it yet, but what she's building will change not only her life but the lives of hundreds of people. Stay with me. The first real piece Laura created in the new studio was made of glass fragments, glass from broken windows that Daniel had collected. Green, blue, transparent, some with old air bubbles. She spent a week just cleaning, sorting by color, breaking into smaller, manageable pieces. She used the mosaic technique she'd learned years ago in a workshop in Portland, before life became what it had become. She created the image of a wave, not a threatening one, a beautiful, stylized wave, with smooth curves and colors ranging from dark blue to sea green to foam white. In the bottom right corner, in letters made of amber glass, she wrote, Asterisk Seabrook, March 28, 2024. We survived. Asterisk. When she finished and hung it on the warehouse wall, illuminated by a single bare bulb swaying gently, she stood staring at it for half an hour. Daniel appeared, stopped beside her, looked at the piece. Silence. Then, it's too beautiful for something made from destruction. Laura shook her head. It's not too beautiful, that's the point. To show that beauty can come from destruction. That trauma doesn't have to be the final word. That we can take the literal pieces of the worst day of our lives and make art. Daniel thought about that, then smiled. You should sell it. Make more. People would want them. Laura looked at him. Not this one. This one's not for sale. This one stays here. It's the first. It's the one that will remind us why we started. But you're right. I'll make more. Many more. And she did. In the following months, Laura created 17 mosaic pieces using glass from the wreckage. Each different, each telling a different story. One showed Seabrook's skyline before the tsunami. Another showed holding hands. Another showed a child flying a kite. She started selling them, not for much. $50, $100 for the larger ones. The money mattered less than the symbolism. People didn't buy them for decoration. They bought them because they needed physical hope. Something to hang on the wall and look at and remember that beauty was still possible. But the real change, the one that made Laura realize she was building something bigger than a studio, happened in October. A Tuesday, cloudy day, cold wind off the sea. A woman walked into the warehouse. Laura was sanding a piece of reclaimed deck wood for a new project. The woman was about 50, gray hair tied loosely in a ponytail, red eyes from too much crying or too little sleep or both. She held a shoebox against her chest like a treasure. Can I help you? Laura asked gently, setting down the sandpaper. The woman didn't answer right away. Looked around the warehouse at the pieces hanging on the walls, the boxes of cataloged objects, the banner now stained with humidity but still legible. You're Laura, the one who makes art from lost things? Laura nodded. I am. The woman took a deep breath. My name's Jennifer Hayes. I live down Ocean Drive, number 189. 3 houses down from where your studio used to be. Laura approached. I remember your house. It had roses in front. Jennifer gave a sad smile. They were my mother's. She planted them before she died. I took care of them like I was taking care of her. All gone now. Jennifer extended the shoebox. Laura took it. You can open it, Jennifer said. Laura opened it. Inside were letters, dozens of them. Yellowed envelopes, thin airmail paper, foreign stamps. Laura looked at Jennifer, waiting for an explanation. They're letters my father sent my mother during the Vietnam War, Jennifer said. He was stationed there between 1968 and 1970. Wrote to her almost every day, texto copiado. 247 letters in total. My mother kept them all when she died. I inherited them, kept them in the house, in the attic. I thought they were gone. I thought the tsunami had taken everything. But yesterday, she paused, her voice breaking. Yesterday I went back for the first time since March. I couldn't before, didn't have the strength, but yesterday I did. I dug, and I found this. The box was buried under debris, wet, damaged, but the letters. She began to cry. The letters survived. Not all of them. Some are destroyed, but most are still readable. Laura looked at the letters, picked one carefully. The paper was fragile, stained with water and mud, but the ink was still legible. Asterisk, my dearest Susan, today was a hard day. We lost 2 men in an ambush, but I think of you and remember why I'm fighting. For a future where we can have children and grow old together. I love you more than words can say. Yours, Johnny. Asterisk. Laura felt a tightness in her chest. This is precious, Jennifer. This is history. You have to preserve it. Jennifer shook her head. I know, but I don't know how. That's why I came. Can you do something with it? Not change the letters, but create something that protects them, celebrates them, makes people understand this isn't just old paper. This is love, this is sacrifice, this is everything. Laura looked at the letters, at Jennifer, back at the letters. An idea began to take shape. I can, she said slowly. I can create an installation. I can scan the letters, enlarge excerpts, print them on large panels. I can frame some originals in protective glass. I can create a visual timeline. I can make people not just see but feel the journey. Jennifer had tears streaming down her face now. Please, she whispered. Please do it. It's all I have left of him. My father died when I was 12. These letters are the only window I have into the man he was before the war changed him. Laura took Jennifer's hand. I'll do it. I'll treat this with all the care and respect it deserves. I promise. It took 5 weeks. Laura worked harder on that project than on anything since starting the studio. Scanned every letter at the library, transcribed the ones hard to read, chose 10 excerpts that told the complete story, the love, the fear, the longing, the hope, the eventual homecoming, printed them on archival quality paper resistant to deterioration, mounted them in simple wooden frames Daniel made, framed 5 of the best preserved originals in UV protected glass, created a timeline with photos Jennifer Provedijani and Susan Young, their wedding, Johnny in uniform, Susan waiting with a child in her arms, Johnny older, Susan older, up to the final photos before they both passed. When Jennifer saw it for the first time, she broke down. Sat on the warehouse floor and cried so hard that Thomas, who was helping organize a new batch of objects, came running, thinking someone had been hurt. But it wasn't pain, it was catharsis. It was seeing her parents' story treated not as disaster salvage but as art, as something worthy of being displayed, as something that mattered. Thank you, Jennifer said when she could finally speak again. Thank you for making my parents exist again. Laura knelt beside her. They never stopped existing. This story was always alive. I just helped make it visible. The letter installation stayed in the studio for 2 weeks. Over 300 people came to see I-10 Seabrook, a town that now barely had 3,000 residents. 300 people came to look at love letters from 50 years ago, written during a war most barely remembered. They came, stayed, read, cried. Many began to bring their own stories, their own letters, their own surviving things. The studio transformed. It was no longer just a place where Laura made art. It was a living memorial, a community archive, a space where pain was turned into beauty and beauty into healing. And amid all this while, Laura worked 14-hour days. While the project grew beyond all expectation, while people she'd never met began talking about high tide in other towns, other cities, while a San Francisco newspaper published an article about *, the Tsunami artist who turns tragedy into hope, *, amid all of it, Laura realized something. She hadn't thought about her mother's necklace in weeks. Not because she'd forgotten, but because the pain had changed shape, it had transformed. Just as she was turning broken objects into art, her own grief had been worked, sanded, reconfigured into something that didn't hurt as much. It was still there. Always would be, but it no longer dominated. No longer defined. One November night, Laura and Daniel were closing up the studio, organizing tools, covering unfinished pieces. The cold wind slipped through the gaps in the metal walls. Daniel hesitated at the door. Can I ask you something? He said. Laura looked at him. Of course. Are you happy? The question caught her off guard. She really thought. I am, she finally said. Not the way I was happy before. Not the easy, unconscious kind. But yes, I am, because now I have purpose. Now I know why I'm here. Daniel smiled. Your father, Laura said suddenly. What he said about the ocean keeping stories. He was right. You proved it. Every single thing you bring back is a story. And together we're making those stories live again. Daniel looked at the floor, at the ceiling, back at her. My father also used to say something else. That the best discoveries aren't objects. They're people. And I think he paused. I think you were the best discovery the tsunami brought me. There was something in the way he said it. Something in the silence that followed. Laura felt her heart race. She didn't know what to say. Hadn't thought of Daniel that way? Or had she? Maybe she had and just ignored it because she was too busy or too scared. Or not ready. But looking at him now, this man who had shown up with a rusty key and changed everything, she realized she felt something. Something that wasn't just gratitude or friendship. Daniel realized he had said too much, or perhaps said it at the wrong time. Sorry, he said quickly. I didn't mean to. I shouldn't have. Laura shook her head. No, don't apologize. She stepped closer, took his hand. Thank you for finding me, for helping me find myself, for everything. They stood there, hands intertwined, in the middle of a warehouse full of recovered memories and futures being rebuilt. And outside, the distant sound of waves crashing against the ruined coast of Seabrook. The same sea that had taken everything. The same sea that, in some strange and impossible way, had given something back. Something different. Something new. Something that felt very much like a beginning. And maybe, just maybe, like love. Winter came to Seabrook with heavy rains and cutting winds that made the metal warehouse vibrate like a detuned instrument. Laura woke every morning with her body aching from work, her hands stained with paint and resin, her fingers calloused from gripping tools. But she also woke with something she hadn't felt in a long time: anticipation. That good feeling of wanting the day to start because there were things to create, people to help, stories to tell. Her relationship with Daniel evolved slowly, the way good and lasting things usually do. There were no grand dramatic declarations or cinematic gestures. Just small moments that accumulated until they became something undeniable. He started bringing her coffee every morning, always just the way she liked it: too much milk and not enough sugar. She started leaving funny notes on his car dashboard, silly doodles that made him laugh when he found them after long, exhausting dives. They had dinner together, in the trailer Daniel rented at the temporary camp on the other side of town. Simple food from cans and instant noodles, but they talked for hours about everything and nothing. One night in December, while it rained so hard it seemed the sky had cracked open and was pouring entire oceans onto the earth, Daniel told Laura about the day his father died, how he got the call from the oil company, how he flew to New Orleans and waited for 3 days on the coast, while rescue teams searched for bodies that were never found, how he came home carrying only a box with his father's personal belongings from the quarters, a worn Bible, family photos, a broken watch. "I never got to grieve properly," Daniel said, staring at the window where rain streamed in vertical rivers, "because there was no body, no grave, no place to go and say goodbye. So I got stuck between accepting that he was gone and hoping that somehow, impossibly, he might come back." Laura took his hand across the tiny table. "I understand," she said. "It's different from what I went through, but I understand. When my mother died, at least I got to say goodbye. I got to see her body, go to the funeral, close that chapter, even if it hurt too much. You never had that." Daniel nodded. "That's why I dive. That's why I search. Because every time I find something of someone's and return it, it's like I'm doing for them what no one could do for my dad. Bringing him back somehow." Laura pulled him closer, held him in an embrace that lasted a long time, the two of them sitting in that cheap trailer while the storm tried to tear the roof away. "Your father is proud of you," she whispered in his ear. "I know he is. Wherever he is, he sees what you do. And he's proud." At the workshop, the work intensified. Laura now had 6 regular volunteers who helped with everything from cataloging objects, to cleaning tools, to teaching basic art workshops for children on Saturdays. Thomas Berkeley had practically become the unofficial manager of the place, arriving before Laura every morning to open up, organize, make coffee in bulk for whoever showed up. Margaret stopped knitting aimless blankets and started making small fabric sculptures using clothes recovered from the wreckage. Strange and beautiful dolls with expressions, both melancholy and hopeful. Jennifer Hayes, the woman with her father's letters, came back several times. She brought friends, neighbors, people Laura had never seen, and each person who came brought something. A piece of broken china that had belonged to a grandmother, a childhood toy found in the mud, a stained but still recognizable photograph. Laura accepted everything, cleaned everything, and when possible, transformed everything. Not always into large installations like the one with the letters, sometimes just into small gestures. Framing a ruined photo in a frame made of reclaimed wood, turning shards of porcelain into pendants, sewing scraps of old clothes into small decorative pillows with the family's initials embroidered on them. It was in January that something happened which changed the entire scale of the project. A man showed up at the workshop on a Tuesday afternoon. He was wearing a suit, which was already strange, because no one in post-Tsunami Seabrook wore suits. He carried a briefcase of expensive leather. He had that polished, slightly uneasy air of someone who didn't belong there. Laura was welding metal pieces, protective mask on her face, sparks flying. When she noticed his presence, she turned off the torch and lifted the mask. "Can I help you?" The man introduced himself as Richard Castellanos, assistant curator at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. He said he had read the article about the High Tide Project. He said he had driven all the way to Seabrook specifically to see the work in person. He said he was impressed. Very impressed. Laura wasn't sure she believed him. Museum people didn't just show up in rusty metal warehouses in the middle of ruined towns, but he seemed genuine. He walked slowly through the space, looking at each piece with real attention, stopping to read the handwritten descriptions Laura had taped to the walls. When he finished the tour, Richard turned to Laura. "I'd like to propose something," he said. "We want to hold an exhibition at the museum, not just of your pieces, but of the entire concept. High tide as a phenomenon, as a movement, as an artistic response to collective trauma. We'd bring some of the objects, some of your creations, but also documentation photos of the process, video interviews with the people whose objects you transformed. It would be big. Main gallery. 2 months of exhibition, media coverage, everything." Laura stood still, mouth open, brain struggling to process. Thomas, who was nearby and heard everything, let out a cheer. Margaret dropped the fabric doll she was sewing. Daniel, who had just arrived soaked from a dive, stopped at the doorway with water dripping from his hair. "Wait," Laura finally managed to say. "You want to take this?" She gestured vaguely at the entire workshop to San Francisco. "To a real museum," Richard smiled. "A real museum? And we want you to come." to be there for the opening, to talk about the work, to be recognized as the artist you are. Laura looked around, at the metal walls, at the hanging pieces, at the faces of the people who had become family, at Daniel standing in the doorway, looking at her with obvious pride. She thought of her mother, of the letter, of the words. "You are my masterpiece, Laura, the most beautiful one I ever helped create. And artists don't give up. Artists take broken pieces and make something new." "Yes," Laura said, her voice steady. "Yes, I accept." The next 3 months were a whirlwind. Richard returned with a team. Photographers documented every corner of the workshop. They filmed Laura working, filmed Daniel diving and retrieving objects, interviewed Thomas, Margaret, Jennifer, dozens of others whose lives had been touched by the High Tide project. They made Laura sit down and tell her own story, from the time capsule to her mother's letter to the decision to turn loss into art. It was exhausting, invasive at times, but also validating in a way Laura hadn't expected. Selecting the pieces for the exhibition was painful. Each creation had a story, each object had an owner. How to choose? Richard helped, with a professional curatorial eye, but always respecting the emotional connections. In the end, they chose 23 pieces, the original mosaic of the wave. The War Letters installation, a sculpture made entirely of keys found in the debris, symbolizing homes that no longer existed. A dress reconstructed from fabric scraps of 10 different families, each patch embroidered with its story in golden thread, and the time capsule, the original one, complete with Laura's childhood drawings and her mother's letter preserved in glass. The exhibition opening was set for April, exactly 1 year after the tsunami. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Laura traveled to San Francisco with Daniel, Thomas, and Margaret. The city was huge, loud, intimidating for someone who had spent the last year in quiet, traumatized Seabrook. The museum was an impressive modernist building, all glass and white concrete, dominating a major corner of the financial district. Laura felt small walking to the entrance on opening night, wearing a dress Jennifer had insisted on buying for her, shoes that hurt her feet, makeup Margaret had applied with a trembling but loving hand. Inside, the gallery was transformed. Laura's pieces perfectly lit, each one with space to breathe, to be seen, to tell its story. There were explanatory panels written in poetic, respectful language. Large photos on the walls showing Seabrook before and after the brutal contrast. And there were people, hundreds of them, elegantly dressed, holding glasses of wine, circling, looking, reading, absorbing. Laura walked through the exhibition as if in a trance. She saw her life turned into art about art. She saw her pain and her community's pain treated not as pornographic tragedy but as human testimony. She overheard conversations, a woman telling another she had never thought of natural disasters that way affecting real people with real stories. A man saying the Letters installation had made him cry. A group of art students discussing Laura's techniques, how she used degraded materials to create beauty without erasing the degradation. The most powerful moment of the night came when Richard asked for silence and invited Laura to speak. She stepped onto a small improvised platform, microphone in hand, facing a sea of unfamiliar faces. She thought of running, of passing the microphone. But then she saw Daniel, Thomas, and Margaret in the third row, smiling encouragingly. She took a deep breath. "I'm not good with words," she began, and some people laughed softly. "I'm better with my hands. With tools, with transforming things. But today, I need to try to explain why this exists." She gestured around her. "A year ago, I lost everything. My home, my studio, my job, and what I thought was my last connection to my late mother. I felt empty. I thought I'd never recover. But then a diver showed up with a key that opened a time capsule, and inside, my mother had left a letter. And in that letter she reminded me that the sea can take things, but it can't take who we are. It can't take our capacity to create, to love, to begin again." She paused, looked up at the high ceiling of the gallery. These pieces aren't just art, they're acts of resistance. Resistance against forgetting, against the narrative that natural disasters are only statistics and death counts and dollar losses. Every object here had an owner. Every object here lived in a home with people who loved, fought, laughed, cried, and when those homes were destroyed, the stories didn't die. They just needed to be told differently. Her voice broke slightly. "So if you see these pieces and feel something, know that you're not feeling it for me. You're feeling it for Thomas, who lost his record collection but found a daughter again. For Jennifer, who found her father's letters in the mud. For Margaret, who lost her husband but found purpose. For Daniel, who dives every day looking for lost things because he couldn't find his own father. For everyone in Seabrook who's still there, rebuilding brick by brick, memory by memory." The silence that followed was absolute. Then someone began to clap, and another, until the entire gallery was applauding, people with tears streaming down their faces. Laura stepped down from the platform, trembling. Daniel found her, hugged her tight. "You did it," he whispered. "You made your mother hurt again." Laura buried her face in his shoulder, cried. But this time it wasn't the cry of loss. It was the cry of relief, of wholeness, of finally understanding that turning pain into beauty doesn't mean erasing the pain. It means honoring it. It means saying, this happened, it hurt like hell, but it didn't destroy us. We made something beautiful from the ashes. And that is real power. The exhibition in San Francisco lasted 2 months, but its wave spread for much longer. Art magazines published articles, urban design blogs analyzed the work as an example of community resilience through creativity. An anthropology professor at the University of California wrote a paper on the High Tide Project as a case study in post-trauma recovery. Invitations began to arrive. Galleries in Seattle, Portland, even one in New York wanted to host the exhibition. A publisher reached out offering a book contract to document the whole process. Laura returned to Seabrook different, not completely transformed, because real transformation is never instant or total, but definitely changed. She had a new confidence, an understanding that what she did mattered beyond the borders of her shattered town. But she also had clarity about what she truly wanted. And what she wanted wasn't fame, or national recognition, or a museum tour across the country. What she wanted was to continue the work, there, in Seabrook, with the people who had been with her from the start. She gently declined most invitations, accepted only 3 additional exhibitions in nearby cities on the condition that part of the sales proceeds go to Seabrook's reconstruction fund. She said no to the book, but yes to a short documentary an independent filmmaker proposed on the condition it be filmed in Seabrook and include the voices of the entire community, not just hers. She saved the money she earned from the sales of her pieces. Not much, since she still kept prices affordable, but enough to do something important. In June, exactly 15 months after the tsunami, Laura bought a plot of land. Not large, just half an acre on Hillside Road, near where the gym that had served as a shelter once stood. The view from there showed the full extent of the destruction in the lower part of town, but also the ocean beyond, vast and indifferent and beautiful in a way that still took her breath away even after everything. With the money from the sales and a crowdfunding campaign, Thomas organized raising $32,000 from people across the country who had heard about the project Laura began to build. Not a workshop this time, something bigger, something permanent. A community center dedicated to art, memory, and healing. It would be called the Elena Mendez Center, in honor of Laura's mother. It would have gallery space for rotating exhibitions of local and national artists, focused on themes of trauma, loss, and recovery. It would have workshops equipped for woodworking, metalwork, textiles, ceramics. It would have a library of donated books, especially on natural disasters, resilience, and trauma psychology. It would have an archive room where objects recovered from the debris would be permanently cataloged, available to researchers, historians, and most importantly, to the residents of Seabrook who wanted to revisit their stories. Construction took 8 months. It was a massive collective effort. Daniel coordinated the structural side, hiring contractors but also recruiting volunteers for what could be done by untrained hands. Thomas managed finances and logistics with surprising military precision for someone who admitted to having spent much of his life too drunk to manage his own bank account. Margaret led the interior design, choosing colors, textures, furniture layouts with an artistic sensitivity no one knew she had. Jennifer organized material donations, persuading construction companies from nearby towns to contribute wood, paint, hardware at cost or sometimes free. Laura worked on the construction site every day, carried wood, painted walls, assembled shelves. The hands that had grown used to delicate craft tools now held heavy hammers and drills. Her body ached in new ways, but it was good pain, building pain, pain of the future taking physical shape. Daniel worked beside her whenever he wasn't diving. They developed a rhythm. He cut, she measured, he held, she screwed. They spoke little while working, but the silence between them was comfortable, full of mutual understanding. It was during one of those work afternoons in October, when the walls were already up and the roof already covered the space, and it was starting to look like a real building instead of just an idea, that Daniel stopped mid-swing with a hammer and looked at Laura. "I need to tell you something," he said. Laura was crouched down, measuring space for a shelf. She looked up. "Go ahead." Daniel set down the hammer, wiped his hands on his jeans, sat on the still bare concrete floor beside her. "I fell in love with you," he said plainly. "I don't know exactly when it happened. Maybe the day I gave you the key. Maybe when I saw you cry reading your mother's letter. Maybe it was gradual, a little more every day over these months. But it happened, and I need you to know because I'm not good at keeping important things inside. My dad always said the ocean teaches you that you never know when the next wave will come, so you have to say things while you can." Laura froze, tape measure still in her hand, heart racing, mind spinning. She began, then stopped, tried again. "Me too. I fell in love with you, with the way you search for lost things, as if each one were sacred, with the way you're kind, without being condescending, with the way you never tried to fix my pain, you just stayed close while I fixed it myself, with the way you talk about your father with such love even after all this time, with everything." Daniel smiled. That tired, sad smile she had come to love. "So we're on the same page." Laura laughed. "Yes, same page. Same book, same completely crazy, improbable story." He leaned in, kissed her for the first time, right there in the middle of the construction site, covered in dust and sweat, surrounded by tools and wood and the smell of fresh paint, encircled by the city that had died and was slowly being reborn. It was a kiss that tasted of salt and hope. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "Does this change anything?" Daniel asked. Laura shook her head. "Only makes everything better. Clearer. Now get back to work. We've got a beam to finish." He laughed and went back to hammering, but now with renewed energy, with a lightness that hadn't been there before. The Elena Mendez Center was inaugurated in February, almost 2 years after the tsunami. The whole town showed up. Well, what was left of the town. Seabrook's population had shrunk to about 2,200 residents. Many had left permanently, unable or unwilling to rebuild. But those who stayed, stayed by choice. They stayed because they loved that place, because their roots were there, too deep to be ripped out even by the brutal force of nature. And those 2,200, almost half showed up for the inauguration. There was food, barbecue made by the owner of the old Mexican restaurant on improvised grills, salads prepared by the Methodist church ladies, cakes donated by the new bakery, opened 3 months earlier in a repurposed container. There was music, a local bluegrass band playing on the lawn in front of the center. There were children running, laughing, playing tag among the adults still too young to bear the full weight of the trauma, protected by the natural resilience of childhood. Laura gave a short speech at the official opening. She stood on the steps of the main entrance, the lightwood building with large windows behind her. The center's logo a stylized wave embracing a heart hanging above the door. "This place," she said, her voice amplified by a borrowed megaphone because they couldn't afford a fancy sound system, "isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about remembering in a way that allows us to move forward. Every object inside this building has a story. Every piece of art was made from something that survived when it shouldn't have. And everyone who walks in here will understand that survival isn't weakness. Creating beauty from tragedy isn't denial, it's transcendence." She paused, looked out at the familiar faces in the crowd. "This center wouldn't exist without all of you. Thomas, who organized when I was too scattered to think straight. Margaret, who brought beauty when everything seemed too ugly. Jennifer, who reminded me that old stories still matter. Daniel." She looked directly at him, standing in the corner with his arms crossed, smiling that smile of hers, who literally dove into the depths to bring pieces of us back. "And my mother, who isn't here physically, but is in every brick of this building, who taught me that love doesn't die when hearts stop beating. It just changes form. This center is love in the form of wood and glass. Come in, feel at home, create. Remember, heal." The applause was long and loud. People cried openly, without shame. When Laura cut the improvised red ribbon stretched across the door, using the big scissors Daniel held with her, there was a moment when the world went quiet, the wind stopped, the children stopped shouting, the music paused between songs, and in that silence, everyone felt it, the presence of all who had been lost. The 147 people who died in the tsunami, those who survived but left later, those who stayed but carried invisible wounds. All were there, witnesses blessing that space with their stories. In the months that followed, the center became the beating heart of Seabrook. People came every week for the workshops Laura led, mosaics made with recovered glass, sculptures from metal salvaged from destroyed cars, sewing with fabrics from clothes no one would ever wear again. The workshops were therapeutic even when they weren't explicitly called therapy. People worked with their hands, and while they worked, they talked, shared, cried, laughed, processed. The archive room filled up. Daniel kept diving, now with a small team of 3 other divers he trained. They brought up objects weekly watches forever stopped at the moment of impact. Photo albums Laura had learned to dry and preserve using techniques she obsessively researched online. Stuffed animals hardened by salt water but still recognizable. Important documents, birth certificates, property deeds, diplomas, everything cataloged, photographed, made available. And people came to retrieve them, to look for pieces of their previous lives. Sometimes they found them, sometimes they didn't, but the act of searching was healing in itself. It was an acknowledgement that those previous lives had existed. They weren't dreams or fantasies, they were real, and they deserved to be remembered. A year after the center's opening, Laura was organizing a new exhibition, this time not of her own pieces, but of art created by residents during the workshops. There were nearly 100 works, some technically imperfect, but all emotionally honest. An 8-year-old boy had made a small wooden boat painted bright blue with the inscription, "For my dog Buddy who swam away and didn't come back." An elderly woman had sewn a huge quilt using scraps of family clothing, each patch embroidered with a name and date of birth. A teenager had welded an abstract sculpture from twisted metal that, from one angle, looked like a person screaming, and from another like a person dancing. Laura was hanging these pieces with the help of 2 volunteers when she heard the door open. She turned, expecting to see another regular visitor, but the woman at the entrance was unfamiliar. Around 35, casually dressed, light brown hair in a long braid, green eyes scanning the space with professional intensity. "Can I help you?" Laura asked, climbing down from the ladder. The woman approached and extended her hand. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen. I'm a psychologist specializing in trauma and post-disaster recovery. I work with FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, developing psychological support programs for affected communities. I heard about your work here. I read about the center. I watched the documentary, and I needed to see it in person. Laura shook her hand. Welcome, please. Feel free to look around. Dr. Chen smiled. Actually, I came to make a proposal. They sat in the small cafe set up in a corner of the center, where volunteers served, donated coffee and tea, and sometimes homemade cookies. Dr. Chen explained. There was a growing movement in the mental health community recognizing that art and creativity were powerful tools for post-trauma healing. But practical models were lacking. Concrete examples of how to implement this on a community scale were missing. The High Tide Project and the Elena Mendez Center were exactly that. They were the model. We want to formally document your method, Dr. Chen said. We want to create a manual based on what you've done here. A guide that can be replicated in other disaster-affected communities, earthquakes in Alaska, hurricanes in Florida, wildfires in Colorado. Every disaster is different, but the principle of transforming loss into creation is universal. And we want to bring you on as a consultant. Not to leave Seabrook, but to help train others doing similar work elsewhere. Laura listened in silence, processing. When Dr. Chen finished, Laura asked, "And what exactly would you need from me?" "Your story, your process, your willingness to teach." We'd make visits here, maybe once a quarter. We'd bring small groups of mental health professionals, social workers, community artists. You'd show them how it works. Share your successes and failures. Help adapt the model for different contexts. In return, FEMA would provide funding for the center. Not much federal bureaucracy is slow and stingy, but enough to cover basic operational costs. You wouldn't have to rely solely on donations and sales anymore. You'd have stability. Laura didn't need to think long. "Yes," she said, "but with one condition. Everything that's documented, every manual created, must be freely available. I don't want this commercialized. I want any community that needs it to have access without paying." Dr. Chen smiled broadly. "I was hoping you'd say exactly that. We have a deal." In the years that followed, and yes, years. Because healing doesn't happen in months or weeks, Seabrook continued to rebuild, slowly, with setbacks, with some people still leaving, unable to overcome their ghosts. But also with new people arriving, artists drawn by the center's growing reputation, young families seeking authentic community, researchers interested in urban resilience. The town didn't become what it once was, it never would. But it became something new, something built consciously rather than inherited passively. Laura and Daniel married on a spring day, 3 years after the tsunami, a small ceremony on the lawn in front of the center, only 50 people, no luxuries, no show. Margaret made Laura's dress from new fabric, but decorated it with lace salvaged from a wedding gown found in the wreckage, whose owner had never appeared to claim it. Thomas officiated the ceremony, having become an online minister specifically for the occasion. Jennifer baked the cake. Daniel wore a borrowed suit that was tight in the shoulders, but he didn't care. The vows were simple. Daniel promised to keep searching for lost things, including parts of Laura she didn't even know she'd lost. Laura promised to keep turning pain into beauty, including theirs. When it came, both promised to honor those who were lost by living fully, creating constantly, loving fearlessly. When they kissed, sealing their vows, the ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and something more. Something like a blessing. 5 years after the tsunami, a memorial was erected. Not by the government, not by any outside organization, but by the community itself. It was a bronze sculpture at the top of Hillside Road, the highest point in Seabrook, where everyone had run that terrible day. The sculpture depicted a wave, not a threatening one, but a stylized curve, elegant, and within it, in negative space, the silhouettes of people, 147 silhouettes, one for each life lost. And at the base, a plaque with all the names, and beneath the names, a line Laura had written. "The sea took much, but it did not take love. It did not take memory. It did not take hope. These things we carry, these things we honor, these things we pass on." Laura was there at the memorial's unveiling, Daniel beside her, holding her hand. She was 38 now, hair streaked with a few gray strands she didn't hide, wrinkles beginning to form around her eyes from so much smiling and squinting at the sun, a strong body from years of physical work, and inside her something she hadn't had in a long time, peace. Not the peace of someone who never suffered, but the peace of someone who suffered, survived, and chose to create beauty on the other side. The sun was setting when the ceremony ended. The sky painted orange and purple, the sea calm, almost gentle, as if it had forgotten its own violence. Laura looked out at that vast expanse of water, and for the first time since the tsunami, she felt no fear, no anger, only recognition. The sea was the sea, powerful, indifferent, capable of destruction, but also capable of revelation, of bringing unexpected gifts, of connecting stories across time and space. It had taken her mother's necklace, but it had brought back the time capsule. It had destroyed her life, but it had given her a new purpose. It had taken everything, but it had taught her what truly couldn't be taken. Daniel squeezed her hand. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. Laura smiled. "My mother, how she was right. The sea can take houses and cities and entire lives, but it can never drown what truly matters. That stays always stays, and we carry it forward." Daniel kissed the top of her head. "She knew. Your mother always knew, and now you do too. And you're teaching everyone you meet." Laura nodded. "Yes, I am, and I'll keep doing it for her. For us, for everyone who will come after and need to remember that after the worst wave, it's still possible to rebuild, still possible to create, still possible to love." They stayed there until it was completely dark, until the stars began to appear, until the wind cooled and they needed to go home. And as they walked down Hillside Road toward the center, its lights glowing because there was always someone there, working, creating, healing, Laura looked back one last time, at the memorial, at the silhouettes against the darkening sky, and she whispered not to Daniel, not to anyone in particular, but to the universe, to her mother, to everyone the sea had taken. "I remembered, and I transformed, and I went on, just like you taught me. Thank you." And if you made it this far into this story, if you felt something following Laura's journey, I need you to do 3 things now. First, leave a like. It's not just to help the channel, it's to show that stories of real resilience, of ordinary people facing the impossible matter. Second, subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell, because every week we bring stories like this, stories that make you feel, think, believe that, even in the worst moments, there's still hope. And third, the most important, comment below. Tell us, have you ever faced a great loss? Have you ever had to start over from zero? What would you create if you could turn your pain into art? We read every comment, every story matters. Every voice deserves to be heard. Just as Laura turned rubble into beauty, you can turn your story into inspiration for someone watching right now who needs to hear that survival is possible. So comment, share, and always remember, the sea can take much, but it can never drown love. It can never drown hope. It can never drown you. We'll see you in the next story.